15 minutes of workplace chatter you want to overhear. Welcome to the Friday 15 with your host, Paul Mastrangelo of First Domino Consulting and Jeff Jolton of Spencer Stewart.
Hey, wow, we're back. This is incredible. All right, so Paul, speaking about chatter, I was picking up on where we were last week. So we were talking about motivation and organization, and we were saying that, is there a congruence between the motivations that people have and the organization's goals, values, strategy, right? And so if we have a mission-based organization and I'm a lifestyle motivation person, not necessarily good or bad. You were about to make some wild, sort of like if I'm a surgeon who is incredibly competitive and challenged, is that necessarily good for the organization? Like, we're doing all the surgery, right? So, so being kind of mindful about that. And what that started to get me kind of thinking about is getting into this whole thing about the idea of what makes a really good mix of people in the organization. And so at Spencer Stewart we do culture work, and one part of that culture work is we have a organizational assessment of a profile of the org culture, but then we also have something called the individual style profile, which is what your individual preferences are that match that culture profile. And I know that sometimes we have clients that think that all their employees, ISPs, should match the company culture. And that would be like everyone being a clone of the company culture. And I don't think we want that, right? We don't want everyone to be exactly the same. We don't want everyone to have the same preferences or the same, motivations and all that, but we don't necessarily want everyone to be in conflict with one another either, right? We're always kind of talking about like what the right mix is. So my question, without us like going too dangerously into diversity and the dangers of all that, I know it's like very third rail hot topic, although I think we can handle it. Um, yeah, like what is like how much is too much, or like what is fit, like what is good fit, like should we be more like, should we embrace more differences, is it all about like a lot of diversity of thought is better than less, is it a lot of motivational differences is better or less motivational differences, like so where would you stand, would you want a hospital more of more mission folks only, like what's your goal there?
Well, first of all, Jeff, I can't think of anyone better to talk about diversity than two old white men. Clearly, we know about diversity, you and me. All right, enough said on that. Yeah, these are great questions. And my mind does want to go into the third rail topic of DEI. So let's start there just for a second, just so everyone's clear. I think when we're talking about the core classic diversity and inclusion categories, things like race or ethnicity or gender, uh, ability, disability continuum, all of that,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
et cetera, et cetera. Right. We could spend the next 15 minutes. I think it makes a lot of sense to have a certain amount of diversity there. Why do I say a certain amount? I think if we all worked with people that were completely different from us, I don't know, maybe there needs to be some overlap, perhaps, but I think we benefit from my ability to say, wow, Jeff and I didn't think about that. Fred and Juan, please tell us what you're thinking, right? So I love that. So diversity on those classic categories, I think makes sense. Let's look to some research. There was a study that came out, gosh, I think it was 9 years ago. Um, Schneider and was it Gertrum, who looked at personality variables or personality measures, but they were aggregated for the entire organization. So their unit of analysis was organization. They had however many, let's say 200, I don't recall. And they were trying to find out what's the right combination of personality attributes at the organizational level to produce financial success. And their conclusion was it didn't matter what the profile was. It didn't matter, like if you think of the big five personality, that didn't matter. What mattered was having homogeneity. So the less variance, the less variability in, let's say, extroversion, the better. You could have a very highly extroverted organization or a more of a quote unquote introverted organization. That didn't matter. What mattered is that most people were the same, and that produced better performance, which is interesting because I think that's where you're going. It's like, oh, wait a minute. There are some aspects or attributes that a person brings where it makes sense and it's beneficial to have diversity. There are some where maybe it does not. And then, but let's break that down further. Because I don't believe it's true, to your point. I don't think I want everyone to have the same profile. But would I want everyone in the sales team to have the same profile? Maybe I would. Would Dr. Stephen Strange, the Doctor Strange character, when he was still a surgeon, as you recall, was highly challenge oriented. We talked about motivations last week, right? So here's some. Would he have gotten into that car accident and pushed himself if he was in a different environment where that was not as encouraged? Oh, wow. Well, so now there's all sorts of, fit criteria by role, by organization, by, personal characteristics. I think it's a mess. I don't know if there's research to guide us here, but my gut tells me I want diversity in the classic definition of diversity. I would push back a little bit to say maybe I want a certain team to think very, very similar. And I know, I think you're going to push back on me. I think you talked about whatever, an 80-20 rule or something like that, where maybe we shouldn't have 100% homogeneity, but what that range is, maybe it goes no more than 80, but never drops to, less than 20 or something like that. What are your thoughts? What are you thinking?
Yeah, no, so there's definitely, so I know we're kind of talking about, bring the right computer here, but how do I get this on the screen, right? Get this online. Uh, is this showing? I hope it's showing.
Yeah.
So obviously with the traditional components, I'm just going to say I think we shouldn't even be like where it is what it is. Like the mix should be whatever the mix should be. Like we should not be um we should be naturally mixing and having diversity there, right? We should not be striving for a totally white male, under 35 population, right? It just is, we should be doing everything we can to have the right appropriate representation, period. But when it comes to the cognitive elements, the perspectives, I do think that's where we should be maybe a little more mindful about what that mix should be and whether, like, do we need, like, there can be situations like we want people to have the same aligned values and priorities. We don't necessarily want everyone to have very different priorities and values that could create a lot of issues for the organization. Or, we want people to have a certain level of ethics. Like if I'm in a bank, I don't want people to be like, compliance and rules, I don't need to follow them, right? So I think there are things where we can be like, we need to be very homogeneous on things that may be on that cognitive side sometimes. So I think I can see where that that falls into into where we are looking for some mix. I do think that the research out there there is more benefit within teams. Now, this is teams research, not organization research, but teams research has said the performance potential tends to be highest with slightly heterogeneous teams, meaning that there's um, some mix, but not everyone being different. Like what we get, everyone having a different point of view is going to make it very difficult to align. There can be some success, but it makes it difficult to kind of form and norm and get to that performance stage. But when you have just some mix, you have enough to kind of spread in and create enough of that friction to create the pearl inside of the oyster, so to speak. But not enough, so much conflict that it's so much storming before you can get to the productive part. So, and not so homogeneous that you're not getting any unique thought or innovation or a drive that would come from some of that additional direction. But I think when we're talking heterogeneity, I really want to be thinking more about those what I was calling the cognitive differences on that slide. I don't want us to think we're talking about the traditional measures.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I hear you. And so it's interesting. So I said I wanted to go right to the third rail, and here's why I'm thinking that. What a great rebirth or reinvention, and I don't mean this to be disrespectful. Imagine if we started talking about those different layers of diversity. I and I guess there might be some pros and cons to this. I don't want to steal, a cause, which is we need to have more equity and equality in the workplace. I'm for that, just for the record.
Same.
But right, who wouldn't want that? On the other hand, it would be interesting to say, well, don't think of me as a color or as a gender or as anything else. Uh, I'm more than that. And so the ability to say yes in terms of people who look like me, yeah, I can see wanting to have a little bit of diversity and yet also have someone that does look like me. And what about someone who acts like me? Well, God knows. I don't necessarily want everyone to act like me, but yet I want someone to get me, right? I want someone
Right.
who's going to get my craziness. And, and then someone who thinks, as you said, a cognitive aspect. So I think that would perhaps be fascinating in terms of how do we go, what implications would it be on a DEI program to have the broader conversation and then loop back and say, well, now how do you feel about working with people of a different race than yours? Well, what difference does that mean? That doesn't matter. It's these other things that we were talking about that are far more important, which I think is the point. So, what a rich conversation if an organization or a group of people or a team could have that dialogue and work through that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, but I also think that there's a reality, and I think that's true for everyone, regardless. Like everyone has their own background. Like you're saying, hey, we're two old white men, but we're also very different white men, and we have very different backgrounds, and that is our lived perspectives are very different as a result. And I think when we talk about why we should have the traditional diversity, that also lend to that cognitive diversity as well, which doesn't mean that a woman cannot think like a man or whatever, but they do have different life experiences that can bring in different motivations, different thoughts, different values that can benefit and benefit the organization in many ways, and how people are led and how the strategies can come up and how programs are run, all those wonderful, wonderful things. But again, just like that word I keep using all the time, there's an intentionality that has to go with it. Culture is not something that should be happenstance. And so as we ultimately are talking about all of these things, we should be very thoughtful about, well, what is our culture? What is it that we really want it to be? And then what are the pieces that we need inside of that? And so those are the people, those are the motivators, those are the values that we want to have. And so if we want a culture that is very innovative and very driven and very passionate, then you're going to be needing to be very thoughtful about the kind of people you're bringing into that organization, because someone who is just there for the lifestyle and not really very interested in creativity and doesn't really have a competitive bone in their body is not going to bring that culture to life. They can do a job, but they're not going to bring that strategy and that culture to life. And that's what, if you can think that culture, but it's not going to make it happen. And you have the processes to make that happen? So you can have those people, but then do you have the processes that can take advantage of the energy and that thought and all that? And a lot of companies do not put all those pieces together. They just think it's all magically going to happen, which magically we are over 15 minutes. So
then I guess we have to call it. Really appreciate your thoughts today, Jeff. Have a good weekend, everybody.
Good weekend. Cheers.